Good morning. Good to see everybody here this Sunday morning. Ready to get back at it again. Before we start, we'll approach our God in prayer. So we'll ask if there's any particular prayer requests that we need to have on our minds as we move through today and throughout this week that you have. All right. No particular hands. That doesn't mean there aren't people out there, but nothing particular today. So that may be good, I hope. All right, if you'll bow with me. Most glorious Heavenly Father, we welcome this opportunity to gather together, this opportunity to study more of your will, and this particular opportunity to speak with you. And what a special thing that is to be able to communicate with you and know that you're listening and know that you're answering. We're grateful for all the things that we've been blessed with here in our lives in this place as individuals and as a congregation. And we ask that that might continue if it's your will, and help us to be faithful to you to make that be. We're very mindful, though, of those that cannot be with us today, those that may be also members of our family, our friends that may be going through difficulties. We have many names on our prayer list, and we're mindful of them. We're mindful of ones that may be in our hearts and minds, and we know there are probably others that only you are aware of, and we know that you can act on their behalf to return health, to give them comfort, give them strength, whatever they might need, and we ask that you'll do that as it best suits your will, and help us to play a role in that, to be your voice, your hands, your comfort when we can do that for you, these people on your behalf. As we go to study your word today, we hope that each of us will be carefully reading and listening and looking for what we can glean from the lives of the people that we're going to look at, and how we can apply that best to our lives, what we can do better and what we can avoid. And we ask always your guidance that we live a life according to what your Son exemplified for us, that we read about, and that you've indicated you want us to live. We pray this in your Son's name. Amen. All right. We still are talking about Here I Am, because there's plenty of those still in the Bible, so we're going to go on that. So quick review. We've talked about several different people. We talked about Abraham and Isaac, and God testing Abraham, kind of to see if he's worthy of the promises that was going to flow down through him. And Abraham passed that test with flying colors, as did Isaac in his brief obedience to his father. Jacob and Esau show God's ability to use people with different characteristics, different tendencies, in a way that suits him best. He loves everybody equally, but he knows how to use them and the situations and the behaviors that they're going to display. With Joseph and Jacob, we find that God had a plan. You have to be willing to be a part of God's plan. It doesn't always make sense. Did it make sense to Joseph when his brothers threw him in the pit, when they sold him, when he went into slavery, when he went into prison, when they forgot him after he had been able to interpret dreams? No, none of it made sense then. But when his brothers came and he now was second in command in Egypt and could meet their needs and the needs of much of the world, he understood that God had a plan for him. And Jacob had to follow through with God's plan that his people would go and be in Egypt for 400 years and be oppressed, and he had to go there to make that happen. Moses may have sort of understood what God wanted him to do, very much did, but he was not a very committed volunteer. He was a reluctant volunteer. He was not a volunteer at all. He very much had to be pressed into duty. He had every excuse under the sun why not to do it. But the good thing is, through his faith, he executed. Once he took on the responsibility, he followed through on it. We talked about Caleb. In Caleb's case, it wasn't an answer to a question. He was making a claim. He staked a claim to his part of the promised land, what had been promised to him by God through Moses, particularly from what he had taken. And his faithfulness in following through to being one of the two people that were able to be adults that went into the promised land, and for God to have kept his power and strength up to the point where he was able to take the piece of land, to force out the giants, and to assume control of that, and to be a good leader and a good father from that perspective. And last week we talked about Samuel. We talked about his answer. He was an answer to his mother's prayer. Hannah had wanted to have a child. She went so far to say, God, if you give it to me, I'm going to dedicate him to you. He'll be yours. And so he was dedicated to God. He was taken after he'd been weaned and turned over to Eli the priest, and he became Eli's pseudo-son, adopted, so to speak, along with Eli's own physical two sons who were very much evil, did everything opposed to what God wanted from that perspective. But God established Samuel to move forward. He established him as a prophet with bad news about what was going to happen to Eli and Eli's family. Now, I told you last week that, I like to do these and then not have any time for you guys to talk at the end, because who can debate me at that point? But there are times that I get things wrong from that, and I appreciate that being pointed out to me when I make a mistake from that. So last week, don't tell Gary I said it, but Gary did afterwards remind me that when I said that this was during the time of the patriarch age, it wasn't. Obviously, they were under the Mosaic law. And so I misstated that last week, and so I take blame for that, but don't give him credit. That'll just go to his head, and we'll not be able to live with him at all. So I'll take blame and admit I make mistakes, and I definitely do. So always keep me on my toes that way. I do not intend to do that kind of stuff. So Kent a few weeks ago told me about chapters I had wrong. He didn't come up and say anything about that one. I figured the rest of them were sharp enough to figure it out. Kent, they didn't need to know, so I didn't correct that one. But anyway, I do appreciate it when you guys tell me stuff from that. I don't intend to ever say anything that's not totally accurate. Finally, Samuel had the hard time not only of having that prophecy that God gave him about what was going to happen to Eli, but he had to turn around, and Eli forced him basically to tell him what God said and be honest about it and be complete about what he said from that. And that was a very hard thing. I'm sure he had very close feelings for Eli as his pseudo-father, and yet he carried it through from that. And so that's where we were when we went through last week of the people. And surprise, we're talking about Samuel. So we're not going to move on to a different person, but we're going to talk about a very different situation, a very different kind of here I am than what he said before. So when we saw him before, he was answering God, thinking he was answering Eli, and saying, here I am, and I'm ready to do whatever you want me to do from that, and finally having that be a response from God and telling him about the prophecy and setting him up as a prophet, one of those people that was getting that direct word from God. The patriarchs weren't, but the prophets were during this period of time. So what happens with Samuel? So let's kind of always start out with a little bit of background. We'll get to our story when we have those words shared. So in the first Samuel chapter 7, you may remember at the end of our discussion last week, we saw the carrying out of God's basic prophecy about what happened to Eli and to his sons, right? We saw the battle going on with the Philistines, seemingly, potentially, we can't say that for certain, kicked off by God in talking to Samuel, and Samuel talking to the people. And the next thing we know, they're going into battle with the Philistines. But this time, the battle does not go well, and a lot of people die during that. And the first time, they lose about 4,000, and the people are all upset, and the people don't talk to God about what to do with it. They go back to that kind of problem like they did when they had issues originally taking the promised land and had problems with the people in Ai. They say, hey, what we'll do is we will take the ark with us. We'll put it in front of us. It was that thing that was able to take us across the Red Sea. It took us across the Jordan. It's magical. It's God in our midst, and nothing can stop us if we've got that ark. And that's, in fact, what the Philistines thought. Remember, they were scared. They didn't even know if they could be brave enough to be men and still fight the battle. But instead, 30,000 Israelites died, and among them were Eli's two evil sons who were there with the ark. And worse than that, the ark was taken. And when the word got to Eli, he was very old, he keeled over very heavy, and he broke his neck and he died. So the prophecy was carried out last week. And worse than that, we have the ark and the possession of the Philistines. Well, the Philistines didn't find it to be a good thing to have the ark. God did not bless them with that. They put it into their temple, and the idol that they had fell down in bowing format to the ark, and then it tried putting it back in order, and then it broke, and they said, we got to get rid of this thing. They moved it around, and finally they had to give it back to the Israelites. They even made some gold rats and other things to be able to try to show appeasement to God in giving it back. So it went and didn't go back to the central place. People were very afraid of what had all had happened with the ark. And so it was held in a certain place. We'll pick up now a little bit later on when they're going to move the ark from that. So 1 Samuel chapter 7, starting verse 1. Then the men of Kirjath-jearim came and took the ark of the Lord and brought it into the house of Abinadab on the hill, and consecrated Eleazar his son to keep the ark of the Lord. So it was that the ark remained in Kirjath-jearim a long time. It was there 20 years. And all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. Then Samuel spoke to all the house of Israel, saying, if you return to the Lord with all your hearts, then put away the foreign gods and the Ashtoreths from among you, and prepare your hearts for the Lord, and serve him only, and he will deliver you from the hand of the Philistines. So we still get that deal. They're having troubles with the Philistines. They haven't really figured out how to do that. They're now lamenting. This is not unusual. We all know what book precedes 1 Samuel. Judges. What is the common theme of Judges? The people turn their backs on God. They get conquered. They get mistreated. They call out to God to help us. They want to repent. God, ultimately, as mad as he is and as tired as he is of having to do it, relents and sends somebody to save them. And that person is called a judge. Right? So they're a judge. And so Eli was identified as one of the judges. He's now dead from that. They're now again in that same kind of state that we see in Judges. They have gotten to where they were evil, and they've gotten to where they've had to be chastised by some country taking them over, and now they're willing to admit that and lament. And Samuel speaks to him and says, you can make this right with God. Put everything away, that all those other gods, go back to just the God that we know and that delivered us before, and he will deliver you from the hand of the Philistines. Carrying on. So the children of Israel put away the Baals and the Ashtaroths and served the Lord only. And Samuel said, gather all Israel to Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you. So they gathered together at Mizpah, drew water, and poured it out before the Lord. And they fasted that day and said there, we have sinned against the Lord. And Samuel judged the children of Israel at Mizpah. Who's going to be the new judge? Samuel. Eli's sons can't be it, and usually it wasn't passed down anyway. It really is no example of judgeship being an inherited thing like kingships were. There was an attempt by Gideon's son, half-son, to do that, and some others, but it never went that way. So now Samuel's judging the people of Israel. He becomes a judge. Now when the Philistines heard that the children of Israel have gathered at Mizpah, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. And when the children of Israel heard it, they were afraid of the Philistines. We've had no luck with them. You go all the way back to when we had the ark with us and went from there, and it didn't help. We lost 34,000 people in just a couple of days there. So they're pretty scared from that. And so the children of Israel said to Samuel, do not cease to cry out to the Lord God, our God for us, that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines. Just keep praying. Maybe more prayer will make it work. If we're just more diligent about it, maybe that will save us. And we're trusting you, Samuel. You've got that special connection. We know you're a prophet. You've been able to work with this before. And Samuel took a suckling lamb and offered it as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. Then Samuel cried out to the Lord for Israel, and the Lord answered him. Now as Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to battle against Israel. But who's going to intervene? God. But the Lord thundered with a loud thunder upon the Philistines that day, and so confused them that they were overcome before Israel. God often used the weather to do things, or sometimes pseudo-weather with fire from heaven instead of rain. In this case, it's thunder. The loudness of it threw them off. And they were so overcome and confused by the thunder that they were open to being overtaken. And the men of Israel went out from Mizpah and pursued the Philistines and drove them back as far as below Beth-kar. Now, don't know. Did the thunder not affect the Israelites? Did they not hear it? Was it just something they could deal with better? Did God make it where the Philistines were more prone to? We don't know. We just know that apparently the Israelites were less affected than the Philistines by that loud thunder that God created. Then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shin and called its name Ebenezer. Ever heard that in a song? Ebenezer? Saying, thus far the Lord has helped us. So the Philistines were subdued, and they did not come any more into the territory of Israel. And the hand of the Lord was against the Philistine all the days of Samuel. Again, familiar? Yeah, when a judge took over, there was peace for however many years the judge lived. There tended to be peace from that. Once he conquered them, as long as he's living, and as long as he was living, the people usually did a fair job of following the Lord. Once he died, all bets were off, right back to doing everything but what God wanted from that. And the cities which the Philistines had taken from Israel were restored to Israel, from Ekron to Gath, and Israel recovered its territory from the hands of the Philistines. Also, there was peace between Israel and the Amorites. So, we've got that progression. Eli's dead. Samuel's been proven to be a prophet. But we still got the difficulty with the Philistines, to the point that people finally are willing to repent. They're finally willing to give up on their idols and turn back to God. And the Savior for that, the deliverer, the judge this time around is Samuel. And when Samuel does it, God intervenes again, as he did when his people were faithful, through thunder this time, and they were able to defeat the Philistines, and they were able to get peace with the Philistines and with the Amorites while Samuel was alive, in particular why Samuel was a judge from that. And Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. He went from year to year on a circuit. He traveled around doing judging, like you think judging to be, to Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, and judged Israel in all those places. But he always turned to Ramah, for his home was there. And he judged Israel, and there he built an altar to the Lord. Remember, Ramah was where his family came from. He's in the hill country. So that still was his center of his life, is to get around there. He'd run around like, they used to have circuit preachers out where I come out in the West. You had people that would go around to preach at different places, maybe in the same day, maybe they do it over days. You get your preacher at a certain time. I've had to substitute for a circuit preacher once or twice just for filling in purposes from that, which is very interesting. You go there and, you just pop in and pop out of those places, go to more than one in a day. It's kind of an interesting life from that. But that's the way Samuel went around and judged Israel. So all is well for Israel, pretty much, right? They've got peace. Things are going well. Samuel's going around and doing a good job of judging him. From everything we're reading, he's a very faithful follower of God. Things are going well. So that's how it's going to sit with the people, right? Of course not. There's going to find something that's not going to go right. So we've had through the Bible, mostly through Judges, we had 12 in Judges, of 12 judges in Judges. And we have the 2 that are not in Judges, Eli and Samuel. So here's the names of all the ones that are out there. Many of them were not particularly wonderful people. God didn't pick the most righteous person to be a judge. Sometimes he picked people that were as much opposite of that in some ways as possible. Samson was not a very good person, but God used him for his purposes. You can see that with others. Gideon wasn't a particularly great person either from that, as many of them were kind of that kind of people. But we've had them for that. That's how God decided to do things when he first got them into the promised land. He stopped having a defined leader. He'd had Moses. Moses said, we need to have somebody to follow up with me. He had Joshua. After that, the priests led to some extent, but there wasn't a declared leader till Judges came up. Whenever the people were under captivity or under pressure or whatever, then a judge would jump up when they'd fully repent at some point. So he was the last one of those. So that brings us to the situation. See Samuel's son, and now there's going to be a request for a change of government by the people. Samuel 8, verses 1 through 22. Now it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. He passed down the family business, right? He thought that was a good thing to do with that, which is what his predecessor had done. Remember, Eli did that somewhat, tried to have his sons involved in the family business. And let's see if it worked any better for him. And the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abijah, and they were judges in Beersheba. But his sons did not walk in his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain, took bribes, and perverted justice. Sounds familiar. Did not work to pass it down. Did not work for Eli. Samuel didn't learn much of a lesson from Eli's situation, even though he was the one that had to share the news with Eli that God had finally had enough. and what was going to happen out of it. He's got much the same situation with his own sons from that. It's not something that only he knows about. It wasn't what just Samuel and Eli knew about Eli's sons. All of Israel knew about it. But this time the Israelites are going to make a request that's different from it. So then all the elders of Israel, the leaders, gathered together, and they came to Samuel at Ramah, his home, and said to him, "Look, you are old." That's something we all like to hear. You are old. Not that any of you have ever heard that. Don't see anybody in here that's probably heard those words, but I've even heard it, so there you go. "And your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations." So they said, "Look, you're getting old. You're not going to last much longer." He did last quite a bit longer, obviously, as we'll follow through the story if you follow the rest of Samuel's life. It's not like this is a passing off time. They said, "Look, your sons, they don't walk in your ways. This is not going to go well. We don't want to be judged by your sons because they're dishonest. And so what do we want? A new judge? No. We want to be like everybody else. It's not good enough to have it the way we are. We're a different country. We're the promised people. We're God's people. But we're decided we want to be like everybody else, which is the way they did with gods and stuff. They expected to have something they could physically, worship. Wanted to worship parts of nature and all those types of things. It said, now you make us a king to judge us like all the nations." Was that a surprise? Probably not. Shouldn't be. But did it make Samuel happy? No. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to judge us." Why do you think it made Samuel unhappy? Well, first of all, did it seem like maybe they were saying he wasn't doing a good job? Look, we got to have a king. This judge thing isn't working for us. He felt it as a personal affront, and he certainly was a defender of God as one of his prophets, and now they're challenging what God had put into place as the way that they were going to be governed. They wanted something different. They wanted to be like everybody else, even though they were not supposed to be like everyone else from that. So Samuel prayed to the Lord. He turned to the right place. And the Lord said to Samuel, because he's a prophet, "Heed the voice of the people and all they say to you. Do what they say." Weird. "For they have not rejected you." I know that's what you're worried about, Samuel. That's where you're feeling some pain about this. "But they have rejected me." They've rejected me as God. "That I should not reign over them. That I should not determine how this is going to work. They are going to tell me how they're going to be governed. That's not me being in charge. According to all the works they have done since the day I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, with which they have forsaken me and served other gods, so they are doing to you also." They're going to serve other people. They don't want to serve you anymore as the judge. "Now, therefore, heed their voice." I'm going to remind you again what I said to begin with. Listen to them. Do what they want. "However, you shall solemnly forewarn them and show them the behavior of the king who will reign over them." He says, go ahead. Do what they want, but warn them what that's going to mean. They don't understand exactly how that's going to work because they haven't been there before. So be sure they understand. It ain't going to change their minds, but you're going to say, later on, they can't come to you and say, "We didn't know this was going to be the way it works." Samuel's going to say, "I told you." So Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who asked him for a king, and he said, "This will be the behavior of the king who will reign over you. Let me tell you what it will be like to have a king. You don't know. It's different than being a judge. King's very different. He will take your sons. He's going to take a bunch of your best people. He's going to take them for his own purposes. Yeah, under the guise of being for the government, etc. But he's going to take people from you. I never did that as a judge. Didn't take your people. Don't have servants. Didn't have all the things. And appoint them for his own chariots to be his horsemen. They're going to be people that are going to fight. Some will run before his chariots. He'll appoint captains over his thousands and captains over his 50s. And will set some, what? To plow his ground and reap his harvest. So he's going to have his whole household. He's got all these people to feed. So he's got to have some that are going to be farmers for his purposes only, not for you anymore. They're not going to be working in your yard or your fields to produce crops for you to sell or for you to eat. They'll be working for him from them. And some will be making weapons for war and equipment for his chariots. There's got to be that, that defense industry that we all live with here. You know how that is. That sucks up a lot of money. And so that's going to suck up a lot of people here. Oh, and don't forget, it's not just the men he's going to take. He will take your daughters to be perfumers, cooks, and bakers. The roles that they can play for him to make things as convenient for him as possible and take care of him and all these people that he's going to be, I wouldn't call it employing, but take along from that. And what's he going to do it on? What's he going to be able to produce this on? Well, and he will take the best of your fields, your vineyards and your olive groves. He's got to have the best to produce the stuff that he needs to have, and to be seen as king, he's going to have the best. So he's going to take it from you. It's not going to come from somewhere else. And give them to his servants to take care of. Not only will he take that stuff, but he will take 1/10 of your grain and your vintage, your grapes and those kind of things, and give it to his officers and servants. And he'll take your male servants and your female servants, your finest young men and your donkeys, and he'll put them to work. And he'll take 1/10 of your sheep, and you yourselves will ultimately be his servants too. This is the reality of a king. It's a whole set of stuff to do that. You set up a real government, you got a whole lot of things that you're going to have to put into play to support that government, and it comes out of you. You understand that. We have this little thing that we have called taxes. Little, not very little most of the time for most of us. It wasn't little for them in the way that it went down from that, but that wasn't something they've been experiencing. But that is the reality of a king from that. And so he wants them to understand that. So he forewarns them, he says, and you will cry out in that day because of your king whom you have chosen for yourselves. And what's going to happen when you cry out about that? And the Lord will not hear you in that day. You asked for the trouble you're about to get. I'm telling you how it's going to go. I'm going to tell you it's not going to be this wonderful picture you're making of, oh, we're going to have a king and he's going to rule us and everybody's going to be impressed with our king and, it's all going to happen without impacting us. No, there's a lot of impact on you if you have a king. A lot of negative impact on you. A lot of things that you're going to give up that you're going to have to turn over to him. You're not even going to have a choice in that. It's just the way it's going to be from that. And you're going to find that to be a heavy load. I mean, we don't ever complain about our taxes, but they maybe did complain about, okay, we do. So you can see the commonality there. They're going to complain and say, wait a minute, this is too much for us. Why do we have this king in front of us? And he says, you can do that all you want. God did not want you to have a king. He's not going to listen to you when you complain about it. You've made this mess. You get to live in it. You have to deal with it, not God. He's not going to deal with it for you. He goes on and says, nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel. They heard all that, and they said, no, but we will have a king over us, that we may be also like all the nations. We want to be like everyone else. We want to be with the cool kids. We don't see ourselves as the cool kids. They're the cool kids because they got kings. And that our king may judge us. Well, who's been judging? We've had judges before. But now we want a king to do that work and to go out before us and fight our battles. We want a leader that goes out. Samuel didn't necessarily do that part. Yeah, go ahead.
It's interesting how people think. They think God tells them everything that's going to happen. So that shows no trust in God. And then he tells them everything that's going to happen, and they still will not listen to his voice.
Yeah. And all the evidence that he'd proven that what he says comes true before doesn't have any impact on him, does it? And it happened. It happened. Yeah, Jack.
Very clear in here that decisions we make have consequences.
Absolutely. Decisions we make have consequences. And we can't go to God and just say, why did you let that happen? He lets us have free will.
God had let them out of Egypt, out of Babylon, and all those things. They rejected him.
That's what he indicated when he talked to Samuel about it. That's a rejection of me. All that I've done for him, leading him out, everything I've done for him, they're rejecting me, which they did over and over again, even during the departure from Egypt through the wilderness, and they constantly rejected God for all that he did for them. And all, like you said, promised and carried out from that. But there's still that. So Samuel heard all the words of the people, and he repeated them in the hearing of the Lord. So the Lord said to Samuel, again, heed their voice, do what they say, and make them a king. And Samuel said to the men of Israel, every man go to his city. Everybody go back home. We're going to carry this out in a very formal manner that God's going to relate to me. Now, God, wasn't surprised by the need for a king. He wasn't surprised that people were going to ask for it. God had foretold this before it ever happened. When he set up the law, when they first were getting to go into the promised land and talk through Moses in Deuteronomy, he foretold this particular situation coming up. In Deuteronomy 17, verses 14 through 20. When you come to the land which the Lord your God is giving you, and possess it and dwell in it, he's talking to the people, and say, what are they going to say? I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me. You will ask to have a king in front of you. You'll say, so I'm going to set one in front of me. You shall surely set a king over you whom the Lord your God chooses. So when that happens, it's going to happen. You guys are going to ask for this. There's no question to that. I expect that to happen. But you need to still involve me. Now, he's going to make an interesting choice the first time around. He's going to make a choice basically that the people would have made in that original leader, as we'll see carried out in a little bit. But he says, one from among your brethren shall you set as king over. You may not set a foreigner over. You can't have somebody else come over and be your king. They may take you captive and force themselves to be in charge, but you're never going to have a king that we're going to recognize that's not an Israelite from that, who is not your brother. But he shall not multiply horses for himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses. For the Lord has said to you, you shall not return that way again. We'll see times when people did violate his edict about that as kings were around. Neither shall he multiply wives for himself. Did they do a very good job of that one? Why? Lest his heart turn away. Solomon? Everybody heard of Solomon? Yeah, kings didn't do a good job of following that through. Nor shall he greatly multiply silver and gold for himself. Now, that's an interesting one only in that God gave that to Solomon in that case, right? We don't really find, several of them, when that happened and they gathered riches from that, it was a blessing from God. It wasn't so much their own greed that made that happen, but we do see some of that greed from that. It shall be, when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, that he shall write for himself a copy of this law in a book. Maybe somebody can correct me. Gary's here now, so he can correct me. I don't know of any writing anywhere that we have of a king doing that. I'm not saying they didn't. I don't know of anywhere in the Bible that says a king sat down and made themselves their own copy of the law. God said that's what they should do. And maybe some of them did it. Maybe David did. I don't know. But I don't know of it happening from that. But it's a big thing from the one before the priests and the Levites. And it shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God and be careful to observe all the words of this law and these statutes, that his heart may not be lifted above his brethren, that he may not turn aside from the commandment to the right hand or to the left, and that he may prolong his days in his kingdom, and he and his children in the midst of Israel. There was a purpose for doing that. It was an attempt, just like it was, to constantly remind yourself and your family about the laws and to put it at the forefront in all you did. That was a reason for the king to understand his power came from God, and his power was only there because of God, and he needed to follow God to remain in that role. And if he did, he might prolong his kingdom. But like I said, I don't know of a listing of when any king actually did that. So God decides to select the king. So read in there, I'm going to go through that, you can read it for yourself, where God identifies someone, Saul, whose appearance fits. Saul is described as being shoulders and head above anybody else, height-wise. He was that guy in the crowd, you go, that guy's a leader, because what? He's tall. He's a big guy. So he was one that everybody would be able to see that person fits that. And he leads Saul to Samuel, so that Samuel can set him up to be king. And God informs Samuel, Saul's to be that king. He leads him there and says, this is the guy. You need to anoint this guy. He's going to be the king. So Samuel anoints Saul. This is very private. He anoints Saul, because what happened? Well, Saul went off on went looking for donkeys and ended up seeing Samuel. That's what he did. And this all came out with Samuel from that. And so Samuel tells Saul of different signs that were proof that he is intended to be that first king. Certain things are going to happen to you, Saul. And when those things happen, that's going to be proof that God's saying that you're going to be the king, you're going to be the king. Saul was somewhat of a reluctant person. He didn't, while he had the physical stature of being a leader, he didn't always execute that with his personality. So that's how it happened privately. Privately, he's been set up to be that. But the people don't know that. Nobody's aware of that except Samuel and Saul. They're the only ones that really know about that. Maybe his servant, maybe a few people that are around, but nobody else meaningful is aware of what's happened. And when Saul goes back to his family and he's asked about his trip, he just talks about the donkeys. Donkeys that got back home on their own. He doesn't mention meeting Samuel or what Samuel did. He doesn't tell anybody about it. While everything happened, just as Samuel said it would, and he knows that God's put him up for this purpose, he's not willing to tell anybody about that. He's not going to assume this role by himself. So now Samuel and God publicly are going to select Saul. 1 Samuel chapter 10, 17 through 25. Then Samuel called the people together to the Lord at Mizpah and said to the children of Israel, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I brought up Israel out of Egypt and delivered you from the hand of the Egyptians and from the hand of all kingdoms and from those who oppressed you. But you have today rejected your God." I want this clear. When I put the king in place, this is what you've done. You're not just doing something that just doesn't have any meaning. This is blatantly rejecting me. You chose to reject your God, who himself saved you from all your adversaries and your tribulations. And you have said to him, "No, it's not good enough, God, for you to be our leader. Set a king over us." All right, now you've decided to do that. Now, therefore, present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and by your clans. This is the way things were done, to choose the person. Remember when they had the problems with AI? When somebody had taken some of the loot, hid it away, and people died because of that when they tried to take AI? How did they find out who it was? They went by the same process, by tribes and by clans, and they cast lots till they got to the person that offended. So now, when Samuel caused all the tribes of Israel to come near, the tribe of Benjamin was chosen. When he caused the tribe of Benjamin to come near by their families, the family of Matri was chosen. And Saul, the son of Kish, was chosen. All right, it's publicly picked. God's made the declaration in a method that all the people are aware of. But when they sought him, they couldn't find him. Biggest man around, they can't find him. Now he's out taking care of the sheep like David was later, right? No. Therefore they inquired of the Lord further, "Has the man come here yet? Is he just not around?" And the Lord answered and said, "There he is, hidden among the equipment." Big, tall guy, stand out physically from everybody else. Already knows he's going to be God's anointed and that God's with him from that. And he's hiding to not be pulled out to be the king. Is that the Saul you remember? No wonder he gets to be a little bit, uncomfortable when David is declared to be the one killing tens of thousands, etc. So they ran and brought him from there, and when he stood among the people, he was taller than any of the people, from his shoulders upward. And Samuel said to all the people, "Do you see him whom the Lord has chosen, that there is no one like him among all the people? Isn't he exactly what you wanted? Isn't that what you've always pictured as your king? Big, tall guy, different than everybody else, physically imposing. That's what you thought. That's what God chose. Just exactly what you wanted. You wanted a king, and you wanted a king like that. That's just the king you wanted." And so the people did what? They all shouted and said, "Long live the king!" Then Samuel explained to people the behavior of royalty, all that stuff we talked about earlier, all that they were going to take from him, and wrote it in a book and laid it up before the Lord. And Samuel sent all the people away, every man to his house. So he says, "This is all the bad things that happen. I'm write it all down. You got your king, but I also want you to know we've warned you, being God, about how this is going to go, and that you're not always going to be happy about this king thing. It has some downsides, starting with the fact that you have rejected God, but it has its downsides just in the way that the government works." So we find the situation where we're going to have Samuel speak out now. All that to lead up to that. So we go on a little further in time, and Samuel calls together some of Israel, and he says to them in 1 Samuel 12, verses 1 through 5. "Now Samuel said to all Israel, 'Indeed, I have heeded your voice in all that you said to me, and have made a king over you. I've done what you've asked for. I've given you what you wanted. And now, here is the king walking before you. And I, as you already said, I am old and gray-headed. And look, my sons are with you. You can deal with them however you want to. They're right there. They're physically around. And I have walked before you from my childhood to this day. Here I am. Why did he say that? I want to witness against me before the Lord and before his anointed. What is it you're going to say that I didn't do? What are you going to say that I was negligent or evil in doing from that? Whose ox have I taken? Or whose donkey have I taken? Or whom have I cheated? Whom have I oppressed? Or from whose hand have I received any bribe with which to blind my eyes? I will restore it to you if you can come up with that one. So, who asked it? There wasn't any question here. It was, again, like Caleb, it was a declaration by Samuel that says, here I am. I'm right here. You want to say something about me? Say it to my face. He wanted to have his honesty unquestioned as the last of the line of judges. You didn't do anything because I was the one. He didn't want a future claim where they said he was corrupt or that he was the reason that they'd asked for a king. I didn't do anything wrong to you or anybody else while I was judge. When you chose to go to the kings, nothing to do with me. You can't say that. We're going to set that up now because when I die, I know what's going to happen when I'm gone. It's kind of like when you've been to work and the last person that left gets blamed for everything. That's broken. Well, Joe, I'm pretty sure Joe did that before he left. It's Joe's fault. That person's to blame until the next person leaves. He knew that was the way they were going to work, and he set it up and said, you're not going to blame this on me. I've warned you about the king. You're not going to set it up that I was corrupt. That's why you went to try to go to kings because I wasn't doing a good job. You're not going to set it up in any way that I'm to blame for the situation you're going to face. Jack, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Another prophet that said, Lord, I know that the way of man is not in himself. It's not in man who walks to direct his own steps. That's what they were doing.
They were directing their own steps, without a doubt. And he wanted to understand they were doing it. Again, it wasn't anything he did. It wasn't God making it happen. They'd made a choice. We've done what you asked for. I know what's going to happen. It's not going to go perfectly well. And you're going to turn it back. Yep.
Anytime I do it my way, I'll mess up.
Well, yep. You're in trouble once you start doing it your own way. So carrying on with the verse, they said, and you have not cheated us or oppressed us, nor have you taken anything from any man's hand. They give him what he wants, which is the sign off. They didn't have any choice. They knew that was the case. Then he said to them, the Lord is witness against you, and his anointed is witness this day that you have not found anything in my hand. And they answered, he is witness. So how does it go? First king. Saul does what? He makes a burnt offering himself without having Samuel do it. No priest is involved from that. In 1 Samuel 13 through 14. In verse 14, Saul tells him not only he's done foolishly, not kept his command, but he says, but your kingdom now will not continue. Now God's searching for a man after his own heart, and he will be the one that will command it because you didn't do what you were asked to. But Saul wasn't done, was he? That wasn't the last time he'd make a mistake. Saul then was told to utterly destroy the Amalekites. And did he do that? No. He saved the king. He saved a bunch of their livestock and stuff. And when Samuel came, he heard the bleating of the animals. The king was around, and Samuel had it all over him. Did God tell you to do that, or did God said completely destroy them? He said completely. But the people said, I like Adam said, but Eve's did. We've always got that excuse for somebody else to be the problem from that. And that's what Samuel was avoiding, them to be able to make him part of the problem. So again, Samuel tells him finally this time, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord. And the Lord, not just me, the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. Will take a while for that to take effect, but that was the cause. So this time the I am is about me setting up myself. I'm here. If you have something to say wrong about me or try to put this, if you're going to try to make me be the scapegoat on this when it goes awry, take your shots now because you ain't got no ammo. When I'm gone, it's harder. It's easier for you to do that because I'm not here to argue that. And you don't have to look me in the face and try to say that stuff. So that was key to Samuel from that. And there was mourning and regret over Saul. 1 Samuel 15, verse 35 and verse chapter 16, verse 1. And Samuel went no more to see Saul until the day of his death. Nevertheless, Samuel mourned for Saul, and the Lord regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. Now the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul, seeing I've rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go, and I am sending you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided myself a king among his sons. What will he do differently when he picks that king? He tells Samuel, what? Don't look at the guy. Again, look for the one that looked like the leader. He said, no, I look at the heart. He finally picked a king from the way he would have picked the king and not the way the people picked the king. So, next week, we move on to Jonathan's armor bearer when he says those words. Different situation again. And there's a couple of scriptures we'll be looking at. Any other final comments? Appreciate everybody's rapt attention. And at least no snoring went on, so I feel good. Snoring goes on, yeah. All right. You can all correct me afterwards. See you next week. Thanks.